Okay, so this video will encompass the IDEA student ratings of instructors. I am basing this presentation on the original presentation done by Dr. Virginia Gonsman. I am Dr. Mary Shuttlesworth. I am in the psychology department at Mount Aloysius College. So the IDEA ratings are basically what students use to evaluate both your teaching effectiveness and also the course in general. So towards the end of the semester, you will get an email from our institutional researcher, Brian Pearson, and he will send you an email asking you to choose some relevant objectives for your course. You'll do that, and then students will get a link in their email to rate the course, and then that data will be available to you after the course ends. So there'll be a specified end date when you'll be able to actually go in and access the student ratings. Okay, so let's talk about where these ratings come from and how they're calculated. Okay, so the IDEA model here is essentially based on the factors that are supposed to influence student learning. So as you can see here from this diagram, there are many different factors that the people who put the IDEA surveys together have found are instrumental in determining basically how well do students actually learn within a course, how well do they make progress on certain objectives under very specific circumstances. So that is the expressed kind of model behind the use of these particular surveys. So we are going to talk about then these individual areas and how they relate to the overall evaluation that students will give of the course. Okay, so students will be rating your teaching behaviors. So you see this is our first component over here. So your teaching behaviors using questions 1 through 20 on the IDEA survey. And so students are basically rating how often do you use any of the teaching methods that you see displayed here. So the first one here, how often does the instructor display a personal interest in both students and also their learning? So everything from, your basic connection to students, how much do you appear to actually care about your students, to how do you structure the learning environment? Do you form teams? Do you give students projects that are supposed to enable their learning? Do you involve them in real life kinds of situations? So how do you do these things? And those will all be encompassed under this factor of teaching behaviors measured by questions 1 through 20. So students will be rating you on that. Then we have student learning. So that encompasses questions 21 through 32, as you see presented here. So students in this particular category here are basically assessing how much progress do they think that they made on these particular learning objectives. So these are fairly general, as you can see listed down here, as they're meant to be able to apply to a wide variety of courses. So you as the instructor, this is where it becomes very, very important for you to be strategic when you are completing the initial learning objectives that you select for your course. So as I stated at the beginning of this presentation, you will get an email from Brian Pearson, our institutional researcher, and he will ask you to select from this same list of 12 learning objectives, which of these are the most important for you in your course. So a good rule of thumb is to only select somewhere between 3 and 5 learning objectives for each course that you think are absolutely essential. If you select more than that, if you select more than the 3 to 5 recommended, oftentimes you'll see very, very deflated, right, or like artificially lowered student ratings of your instruction. So again, the recommendation is I typically just select 3. So I choose the 3 of these learning objectives that I think are absolutely the most critical for my course, and then rate those as essential learning objectives, and the rest of the learning objectives that I think are not that important, I'll rate those as not important. Okay, so that's where you as the instructor can emphasize some degree of control over this process. So students then will rate basically the progress that they think they made on each of these 12 learning objectives. And then we'll go into what we call extraneous variables. So extraneous meaning that these are things that are possibly outside of your control, but they nonetheless influence the ratings that students are going to give for a particular course. So the idea rating statistically will adjust for the influence of these 5 factors that you see over here. So essentially, how difficult is the course? Okay, so how difficult is the course, measured by items 35, 33, 34, and 8. So as you see here, question number 8 and then 33, how much reading is required, how much work is required, how difficult is the subject matter, how much effort does the student put into the particular course, so that's obviously very important in their overall rating, and that's measured by 37, 33, 34, and 8. Question 39 here, what's the student's overall motivation to take this course? So were they highly motivated? Did they really not want to take this course at all? Question 43, as you see down here, what are the students' general work habits? So as a rule, I put forth more effort than other students on academic work. And then the last thing that's out of your control here is the class size. So you will actually see data on the IDEA evaluations that basically tells you of the students who are enrolled in this course, how many actually completed the survey. And that's really important if we're trying to judge the representativeness of the actual evaluation. Okay, so when you get your score reports, you'll get this again after the last date of the semester, typically after final grades have already been submitted. So you'll get an email from Brian Pearson, again, our institutional researcher, saying that your IDEA results are ready for you to review. So you can access these all now through the IDEA database. So everything is online, which makes it super convenient, and it has everything calculated for you very, very quickly, which is really nice. So in the report then, you will see that there's all kinds of data that you get from the reports. So the first thing that you'll see is the raw data. So the raw data is typically all the way at the end. Okay, so you'll see you'll have lots of options for reviewing your IDEA data. And the raw data is basically going to tell you for every single question, so you see every single question that is listed here, how many students responded, right, to each of these points on that scale. So how many students responded? 1, hardly ever, all the way up until 5, almost always, for each individual question. And then you'll see the same thing down here for that progress on relevant objectives, for the student variables. Okay, so all of that will be available for you. Here you can also then see the means or the average, and then also the standard deviation. So you can kind of judge how variable were students' responses looking at the raw data. Okay, so then your next step, you want to evaluate how useful the actual ratings are. So as I mentioned before, you will have the opportunity here to see how many students were enrolled in the class and then how many actually took the survey itself. So in this particular example, might be tough to see because of the video finder at the top here, but of the 29 students who were enrolled in this particular course, 26 completed the survey. So that's 90%. That's really high. This is a good thing. If you have classes that are small, fewer than 10, and have a low response rate, so something below 60%, you should be very cautious in interpreting the output here, meaning that it might not be very representative. You might only be getting maybe the extreme students, so either students who loved your course or students who hated your course. So you might not really be getting the middle ground students to kind of moderate those two extremes. So be careful of that as you are interpreting the results here. The other thing to note also is that if you have very small classes and you don't reach this threshold of 60%, sometimes they won't even allow you to access the feedback at all. So you won't even be able to see it because it's not representative. So last year I had a graduate class. I think I had 5 students enrolled in the class. Only 2 actually completed the survey. And so I wasn't even able to view the feedback that they had given because 2 is just not going to be, that's only 40%, right? That's not going to be representative of the entire class. Okay, so once you have evaluated the potential usefulness, so for this example, yay, we're in business, we've got useful data to look at here. Then we want to look into the summary of teaching effectiveness. So this table basically outlines for you everything that is presented below. Okay, so it gives you some guidelines for how to interpret this information. So according to the IDEA people, the folks who developed this, using the progress on relevant objectives. So what you see here is typically seen as the best way to interpret the overall value of the course. Okay, so to interpret basically how well did you do. Now, if you use the raw score, that's basically the kind of computed average of all student responses. The adjusted score has been adjusted for those 5 extraneous factors that we talked about before. So sometimes things that are out of your control, but they nonetheless influence student responses. So if you look, then you'll see these overall ratings, basically how well do students think they progressed on the objectives that you identified as either essential or important. Okay, so again, this is why it's so important for you to only choose between 3 and 5 of those relevant objectives when you get the opportunity to indicate those. So your objectives then are directly relevant here to essentially how much progress do students think they made, and that's then translated into the score that you see presented here. So the overall ratings then that students give both for you as a teacher and then also for the course are presented here, both the raw scores and then also the adjusted. And then they're going to give you basically the average of the excellent teacher and excellent course. Summary evaluation is essentially the average of A, the progress on the relevant objectives, and then also this average here of excellent teacher and excellent course. So it's basically looking at those 3 things in concert all together and giving you kind of an overall evaluation of the course itself, at least in the definition that the IDEA folks provide here. So from there then, you might want to compare basically how does your course compare to either other people who are in your same discipline or other people who are in your same institution. And so you'll see that all presented down here. So you can compare yourself. So this particular rating form is for a psychology course. The IDEA discipline comparison is other psychology courses that also use IDEA evaluations. And then you can also compare your course specifically to other courses at your same institution. So other courses at Mount Aloysius College, and how did you fare basically compared to other people. All right, so then you can compare your teaching effectiveness to others, also using this metric that is described down here. So if you want to compare your teaching effectiveness to others, you can look at, kind of looking at this progress on relevant objectives, overall ratings, excellent course, all of this stuff over here, and use these guidelines to compare basically how well are you doing. Okay, so anything below a 3.0 tells us that maybe we're not doing such a hot job, right? There might be some things that we need to change, and then it gets better from there. So that's a good thing. All right, so you might also want to compare your teaching effectiveness across those objectives that you selected as the most essential for your course, the most relevant. So as you can see here, in this particular course, this instructor selected 3, okay, so just 3 of the 12 possible objectives as essential, okay, so she only selected 3. So we're basically then looking at, for the objectives that you stated are absolutely essential for students to get from your course, how much progress do students perceive that they actually made on achieving these particular objectives? So looking here, this instructor selected these 3 as essential. This is a good thing, right? So relatively high numbers of students saying, so a 4 or 5 says that they think they made either substantial or exceptional progress on these things that you also, as the instructor, have stated are important. So what if you didn't get such high numbers here, right? What if you had maybe these numbers flipped, where you had 77% in 1 or 2 saying that they either made no or slight progress on the objectives that you identified as essential? Well, this could give you some information as you're moving forward, kind of thinking about, how will I use this to revise my courses in the future? So if you as the instructor basically think that your students are, let's say, taking this first one here, gaining factual knowledge, terminology, classifications, methods, and trends. You think that that is absolutely essential, that your students must get that from your course, but your students don't think they're actually getting that from your course, then that might give you some information moving forward about how you could potentially revise your course to address this. So you could try different methodology then in terms of making sure that students do, in fact, gain this factual information if you identify that that is important or if you identify that that is essential. Okay, so then from there, you've looked at all the data, you've kind of taken everything into consideration. Now you are going to look for ways to improve. So ways to improve. Basically, in this particular part of the idea data readout, you will see that there are particular things, right, that are highlighted here. So if we look at this first line here, number 4, demonstrated the importance and significance of the subject matter. That relates to all of the objectives, right, that you have actually selected here. So that's a good thing. And it's basically saying that you're doing a pretty good job of this right now, right, at least based on what students are saying about your course. So you should consider retaining this, right? Or you should actually consider even increasing it maybe potentially a little bit more down the line. Okay, so they're telling you essentially that for the things that match up with your objectives and then also what students are saying about your course, if you're doing these things well, keep doing it. Okay, so that's what strength to retain actually means. Okay, so how about let's move, how about down here? Consider increasing use. So displayed a personal interest in both students and their learning. So some students are saying that, yeah, you do this well, but not everyone, right? So not everyone is on board with you doing this well. So you might actually then consider doing more of this. And so you might be thinking, how could I possibly do more of this? This is where the website comes in. So if you link to this IDEA website here, you will see that they have all kinds of recommendations already compiled for you for specific ways that you can actually implement, right? That you could actually go about increasing your use of displaying a personal interest in both students and their learning. So lots and lots of great resources there. I encourage you very, very strongly to check these two things out. You'll also see that there is some basic guidance up here provided for kind of how to interpret this information as you're moving forward. Because remember, the goal of this is really to improve, right? The goal is to become better in the classroom and especially in achieving those objectives. All right, and so there are lots and lots of references that are provided here, ways to help you kind of wade through that idea data. I also suggest, if you haven't already, talk to your chair, talk to, if you have a faculty mentor, talk to those people about how they use the idea ratings, and then also how they talk about them in their annual professional development plan. So that's basically our kind of guidelines set for how we plan to improve over the next year. So talk to them about how they incorporate this stuff and also check out these guidelines that are listed here. All right, thank you very much for your time today.